ਕੁਝ ਬਿਆਨ ਹਨ। ਇੱਕ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੈਟਿਕ ਪੀਪਲਸ ਰਿਪਬਲਿਕ ਆਫ ਕੋਰੀਆ ਅਤੇ ਗੁਆਟੇਮਾਲਾ ਉੱਤੇ। ਮੈਂ ਕੋਰੀਆ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ੁਰੂਆਤ ਕਰਾਂਗਾ। ਸਕੱਤਰ ਜਨਰਲ ਨੇ 24 ਮਾਰਚ ਨੂੰ ਹੋਏ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੈਟਿਕ ਪੀਪਲਸ ਰਿਪਬਲਿਕ ਆਫ ਕੋਰੀਆ ਦੁਆਰਾ ਅੰਤਰ ਮਹਾਦੀਪੀ ਰੇਜ਼ ਦੀ ਬੈਲਿਸਟਿਕ ਮਿਜ਼ਾਈਲ ਲਾਂਚ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਸਖਤ ਨਿੰਦਿਆ ਕੀਤੀ।
And during the period of operation of the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala and its personnel to the fight against impunity and towards eradication of corruption in Guatemala, as well as strengthening its institutions. This contribution has been consistently recognized by the Guatemalan authorities, human rights defenders, and international community. Amid reports of questioning the independence of justice and criminal prosecution in Guatemala, the Secretary General welcomes the Attorney General's call that took place on 16th February for a visit to the country by the Special Rapporteur on the independence of judges and lawyers. That statement is upstairs. And today, as you know, marks 1 full month of the war in Ukraine, one of the most rapidly deteriorating humanitarian crises of modern times. The main humanitarian challenge remains the safe, secure access into areas where civilians are trapped in ongoing fighting, such as Mariupol, and safe passage out. Just want to highlight what the work of a number of UN agencies. The UN Children's Fund said today that 4.3 million children have been displaced in the last month in Ukraine. That's more than half of the estimated 7.5 million children in Ukraine. The World Health Organization warned that the war has had a devastating impact on Ukraine's health system, severely restricting access to services and triggered an urgent need to treat trauma and chronic conditions. Destroyed health infrastructure, disrupted chains of medical supplies now pose a grave threat to millions of people. WHO opened an operations center in Resnau in Poland and developed a pipeline of trauma supplies to most Ukrainian cities and sent already 100 metric tons of medical equipment over the border to health facilities in Ukraine. WHO said that some 36 metric tons of supplies are currently on their way to Lviv, with an additional 108 waiting to be dispatched, consisting of trauma supplies, medication for chronic diseases, pediatric drugs, and blood transfusion supplies. In all areas where security permits, including in the East, we, along with our humanitarian partners, are providing assistance. Since the war started, WFP has distributed 644 metric tons of food to 520,000 crisis-impacted people in Kiev and Kharkiv. Important to note that more than 83% of what is in WFP's food pipeline has been procured locally in Ukraine. UNICEF has delivered medical supplies to 49 hospitals in 9 regions, including Kiev, Kharkiv, Dnipro, and Lviv, to improve access to health care for 400,000 mothers and newborn children. For its part, the UN Population Fund has sent more than 13 metric tons of reproductive health supplies and other equipment to Ukraine, which are currently warehoused in Lviv. And on funding, as you may recall, less than a week into the war, on March 1st, we, along with our humanitarian partners, launched 2 coordinated emergency appeals calling for 1.7 billion people to help people across Ukraine and in border countries. Significant pledges have generously been made by donors. 2 allocations at $60 million have been made from the Central Emergency Response Fund to kickstart the response. And as of today, donors have reported $469 million for the Ukraine Flash Appeal. That gives us about 41% coverage. That's better than 38 that we had yesterday. And we thank donors who've released pledged amounts and encourage others to release the money quickly and report their results to our financial tracking system from OCHA. And on a related note, the UN Conference on Trade and Development today downgraded its global economic growth projection for this year to 2.6%, down from 3.6%, and that is due to the war in Ukraine and to changes in macroeconomic policies made by countries in recent months. In a new report, UNCTAD said that while Russia experienced a deep recession this year, significant slowdowns in growth are expected in part of Western and Central and Southeast Asia. UNCTAD also expressed concern that the combination of a weakening global demand and insufficient policy coordination at the international level and elevated debt levels from the pandemic will generate financial shockwaves that could push some developing countries into a downward spiral of insolvency, recession, and arrested development. Turning to Mali, our colleagues in the peacekeeping mission there published their report on trends in human rights violations and abuses that took place between July and December of last year. During the period, at least 886 civilians were killed, injured, or abducted. This represents a small decrease of about 7%, but it is still a lot of people killed, injured, or abducted. That is compared to the first 6 months of last year. Trends showed that extremist groups were the main perpetrators of violence against civilians, while violence by militias or other community self-defense groups decreased. Violations by the Malian defense and security forces during their operations were also recorded in the report. The acts of violence documented were concentrated in the center of the country. Investigations into incidents may have occurred in the first quarter of this year are underway, and a report is expected shortly. And turning to South Sudan, the Sudan People's Liberation Movement in Opposition, otherwise known as SPLM-IO, has suspended its participation in the body responsible for monitoring the ceasefire, citing attacks by governments as the reasons for its decision. The UN Special Representative and Head of Mission, Nicholas Haysom, described this decision as, quote, deeply worrying. However, he also acknowledged the concerns raised by the SPLM-IO about an alarming spike in violence in the conflict in Upper Nile and Unity states, which have directly impacted cantonment sites and civilians. Mr. Haysom has also called on all parties to sustain the ceasefire and keep working to fully implement the peace agreement, given less than 12 months of the transitional period remain. He is further urging parties to put aside their differences on the larger interests of peace, progress, and prosperity. The mission is continuing to engage with communities and authorities in the volatile locations to prevent further escalation of violence and to support humanitarian partners delivering aid to those in need. And the Special Envoy for Yemen, Hans Grunberg, concluded today the third week of bilateral consultations with Yemeni stakeholders in Jordan, in Amman. Participants emphasized the importance of regional and international support for ensuring the success of any future political process. They highlighted the need to address humanitarian and economic issues that could help alleviate the suffering of all Yemenis, including addressing marginalization, the release of detainees, and the reopening of airports, seaports, and roads across Yemen, opening humanitarian corridors and supporting the national economy, the equitable distribution of resources, and unifying monetary policy countrywide.
फ्री सेवा फ्री समाधान बाबा कबीर खान जी काले इलम ते रूहानी इलम दे माहिर 2 ਘੰਟੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਘਰ ਬੈਠੇ ਇੱਕ ਫੋਨ ਤੇ ਤੁਰੰਤ ਸਮਾਧਾਨ ਕਰਵਾਓ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਵਸ਼ੀਕਰਨ ਕਰਨਾ ਜਾਂ ਤੋੜਨਾ ਮਨ ਚਾਹਿਆ ਪਿਆਰ ਘਰੇਲੂ ਕਲੇਸ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਕਰਾਇਆ ਕਾਰੋਬਾਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਘਾਟਾ ਵਿਦੇਸ਼ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੱਕੇ ਨਾ ਹੋਣਾ ਮਾਤਾ ਪਿਤਾ ਮਨਾਉਣਾ ਲੋਟਰੀ ਨੰਬਰ ਤੁਰੰਤ ਨਿਕਲਵਾਓ ਸੌਤਨ ਦੁਸ਼ਮਣ ਛੁਟਕਾਰਾ ਧੋਖਾ ਖਾਦੇ ਲੋਕ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਤੁਰੰਤ ਫੋਨ ਕਰੋ ਮੋਬਾਈਲ ਨੰਬਰ 97797 19721 97797 19721